Logitech launched their little wonder egg, the G305, back in 2018, and since then it has been a mainstay for gamers who want a quality wireless mouse from a top brand that doesn't break the bank. The community have pushed the value even further by working out that with a AAA lithium battery and a bit of tinfoil, you can take the weight down from the 100 grams stock to the low 80s. But the popularity of this mouse has created growing sentiment within the Logitech community that they should make eggs great again and give the 305 the super light treatment. Logitech have instead heartily ignored these calls and instead have released the 305 in increasingly obnoxious pastel hues and K-pop cash grabs. Growing tired of waiting, in 2020, Gamebitions, a small startup from Toronto, Canada, took matters into their own hands. They launched a Kickstarter campaign to bring the 305 into the modern era, and the result of that 2 years of work is the mouse we're reviewing today, the Gamebitions ORBIT. It comes in an attractively designed box that includes the mouse, a USB-C paracord, a wireless receiver, an unbranded metal extender dongle, and a spare set of PTFE skates. I have to say, immediately out the box, the mouse did impress. I'd spent a couple of nights with the Logitech G305 immediately before the Gamebitions arrived, just so that I could get a feel for what the mouse was looking to replace. The weight difference between the two mice is immediately apparent. The 67 grams achieved by the Orbit doesn't make it the lightest wireless mouse around by any stretch, but it is certainly better than 100 grams stock weight of the G305. Whilst the inspirations of the Orbit are undeniable in its appearance, it isn't just looking to be a lighter weight 305. I actually think it's an attempt to fully modernise one with features you'd expect from any top mouse in 2022. It has a Pixart 3370 sensor, Kel GM 8.0 switches, and they've abandoned the AA batteries and instead gone for a 580 mAh rechargeable battery that is charged by USB-C. At launch, it's going to be available in 3 colours: blue, Snooky from Jersey Shore, and white, which is the model that I have here today. Putting specs and colours aside for a moment, the egg shape is still the biggest draw of this mouse. This mouse could only be more Logitech if they attached a brooding picture of Shroud looking directly into my soul on the box. The specs on the screen now show just how close these two mice are, and whilst they aren't identical to the millimetre, this isn't massively felt in hand. If it wasn't for the weight and the cutouts on the shell, it would be difficult in a blind test to tell them apart, which is probably quite a big compliment for the Orbit as they've set out to recreate that shape. It has the trademark inward sloping sides, the subtle comfort grooves in the main clicks, and a low hump that doesn't get in the way of a flat fingertip grip. The coating was smoother than the G305, but I didn't notice it being much harder to grip even after extended play. Probably worth talking about the shell now. Rather than the solid body of the G305, Gamebitions have instead used triangle cutouts to shave probably at most 2 grams off of the overall weight. I think that's actually probably a relic of 2020 when the mouse started its design, and can we all universally agree that in 2022, holes on mice just ain't it, chief? The Dorito cutouts never bothered me on the palm as a fingertip player, but on the clicks they cover about 30% of them and really reduce where I felt comfortable resting my fingers without adding additional weight with grip tape, which kind of defeats the point anyway. There's also a pretty insignificant RGB light on the scroll wheel that feels about as useful as asking Endgame Gear to release a wireless XM1R on Twitter. The stock skates work and are generally okay, but at a point when people are strapping glass, sapphires, and if it glided well, depleted uranium to the bottom of their mouse, I think stock PTFE skates aren't really a box-worthy feature, especially when they're quite a rough glide. Otherwise, the mouse is generally functional, but none of the clicks are particularly satisfying or very well tensioned. The main switches need pressure directly on top of the switch, otherwise they vibrate and feel very loose and grindy. Similarly, the side buttons whilst using full-size switches are incredibly mushy with a ton of pre-travel, which could be a feature because the G305 original side switches were pretty miserable as well. There is also a shocking amount of flex and creak in this mouse, with even the slightest amount of pressure making the mouse sound like a bowl of Rice Krispies. This is probably down to the modular design and most of the mouse being held together with clips and magnets rather than screws. This is a bit of an odd design choice for the Orbit because they don't sell alternative shell pieces, so it feels like you're getting all the compromises of a modular mouse with none of the benefits. As a result of these magnets holding it together, when you squeeze the back, the mouse does do a fun party trick. It's time to meet the Muppet on the Muppet Show tonight. The lack of screws holding the clicks in place do give me concerns about how they'll hold up over time. Saying that, I think it might be fair to give Gamebitions just the slightest bit of slack here. It's part of the first batch of the first mouse they've ever put out, and it's functional with no significant deal-breaking flaws. But all this is kind of irrelevant if the mouse doesn't frag out, and in spite of my nitpicking and mouse nerd complaints, I'm actually really happy that this mouse exists because it's made me realise what I loved about the G305 way back in 2018 when I first tried it. The low hump and button height coupled with the wide shell made it fit in a way that really reminded me of my other current fingertip obsession, the G-Wolf's HSK Plus, which I shared an exclusive sneak peek look at in a video linked on the screen right there. The weight and balance of the Gamebitions Orbit made it a much more comfortable mouse to fingertip than the G305, and surprisingly, the few millimetres of extra length made it a much more easier mouse to claw too. I'm actually surprised that personally I preferred the Orbit shape in hand to the G305. Picking up the G305 again, it made it feel clunky, dated and overweight, which sadly is how my fiance describes me too. The Orbit is kind of like the guy she tells you not to worry about. It's sleek, lightweight, crammed full of features, and it's sliding straight into your girl's DMs. But it isn't Logitech, and that is absolutely felt in the build with all the complaints that I've spoken about. The G305 might be clunky and outdated, but my copy from 2018 to 19 is still here, it's still fragging out, and still feels basically new. This thing is built like a North Sea oil refinery. It's also incredibly cheap, with $30 to $40 not being an uncommon price for it. I intentionally haven't mentioned the Orbit price up until now because it's intended to go on sale March 21st at $70 plus shipping. Whilst this isn't the most egregious price that we've seen for a mouse this year, it is also double the price of the mouse that it's looking to replace. So should you buy a Gamebitions Orbit on release? If the build quality of my copy is indicative of the general quality, then this mouse isn't necessarily built to last, at least not on this batch. The clicks don't feel premium, the shell cutouts kinda look cheap, and it's not even a budget mouse at the $70 price tag. But if you've been hooked on the egg shape since 2018 and been waiting in vain for Logitech to update your boy, then in spite of these initial concerns, the shape and specs of the Gamebitions Orbit and how much better it feels than a fully loaded 305 to use in game will probably be enough to make your own mind up without me needing to convince you one way or the other. Leave a comment and share your thoughts, subscribe because it warms my cold, dark heart. I've been Gary, this has been Get Reviews, and remember, if it's not good enough, I'll be here to let you know. See you soon.